All right, now I have already talked about what energy is and the different types of energy and how certain things produce energy. Now let's talk about the main energy molecule for all cells. Okay, all cells, specifically all eukaryotic cells. However, we'll get more into that later. Okay, it's this thing called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. Now the big thing, we can really define in ATP a bunch of different ways, but let's make it really, really easy. ATP equals energy. Without this molecule, I can't do anything. I can't make this video. I can't run. I can't walk. I can't talk. Can't do anything because my cells can't work. All right? So ATP kind of looks like this weird looking molecule you have down here. It's made of 3 parts. I have something called adenosine on the left. I have a sugar right in the middle, which is ribose. And then down here I have a phosphate tail, or a triphosphate tail, because there's 3 phosphates, adenosine triphosphate. All right? Now you're looking at this and you're saying, where in the world would this store energy? Well, ATP has a type of energy called chemical energy, right? So if it has chemical energy, it's got to be in the bonds of molecules. So right here, boom, boom, these are called phosphate bonds. And those phosphate bonds is where the energy is stored in this molecule, okay? So a real quick lesson of how this creates energy. Each one of these has a negative charge. Let me put a negative underneath these. Now, if they're all negative, they're trying to get away from each other, trying to repel each other. But if I put something holding them together, well, now these things are really, really repelling and really trying to be pulled apart. So if I were to break this bond right here and release this phosphate, okay, well, then I would release the energy from it, okay? So breaking this bond, this phosphate bond, releases the energy, and that's how we're able to do work. So what do our cells use this for? Well, it might be active transport. If you remember from last unit, we talked about processes like endocytosis and exocytosis. I would use the energy stored in this phosphate bond in order for that to occur. All right? So that's ATP. Now, what process do we use to make ATP? Well, cellular respiration. This is a process we're going to talk about next week. We're going to know the ins and outs of it, okay? But cellular respiration. In cellular respiration, I eat food, okay, like an apple, which I talked about in my previous video, and I get this sugar called glucose. I take glucose, I break down my food, I get the glucose, I take it to my cells, and then my cells use that glucose. Now, in that process, we go through something called the ATP cycle. So let's say I have ATP here at the top of my cycle, right? Now, when I break the phosphate bond and I release a phosphate, let me do that again. I release a phosphate, okay? When I do that, I release the energy that is stored in that phosphate bond, okay? This is allowing me to do work. But at the same time I do that, the ATP turned into ADP, okay? ADP is adenosine diphosphate. Adenosine diphosphate. Now, adenosine diphosphate has 2 phosphate molecules. So here's the comparison. ADP, they compare to a half-charged battery, right? So a half-charged battery has a little bit of energy, but not a lot. So in order to get a lot of energy, let's say you got a remote control car and you're going to race it. Well, you better charge that battery in order for that to occur, for that race to occur. So what do I have to do? I have to take this ADP and I got to transfer it back to ATP. All right? Turn it back into ATP. Now this ATP is my fully charged battery. Okay, there's my fully charged battery. Down here I have my half-charged battery. Okay? So this one doesn't have a lot of energy. This one has a ton of energy. So now how do I do that? Well, I go through cellular respiration. When cellular respiration occurs, I use this molecule called glucose, which is from the food I eat. And I'm going to add a phosphate back to it to create ATP. Okay, so another way to write this is, and I'm gonna erase this. If you're watching the video, pause it and take a look at that diagram. But another way to write this, if I say ADP plus P yields ATP. Okay, what did I do there? I took an adenosine diphosphate. I added a phosphate to it, which gives me a lot of energy to make ATP. All right, and that's really about it. Now we could go really deep with the chemistry of an ATP molecule, but that's about it for ATP. Remember, we use this for energy. A lot of functions in the cell. So now, one real quick diagram here, and I know we talked about this in class this week. This is going to be too big. Sorry. Let me go a little smaller. Okay, I have ATP has a bunch of energy in it. Okay, this is a review. I already talked about this. How do I release the energy out? Okay, I'm going to break this bond and release that phosphate. What does that turn into? Well, now this gives me an ADP. I got to draw it down here. An ADP plus this little phosphate floating around out there. When I did this, this released energy that allows me to work. So how did I release the energy from it? I broke that bond to allow the energy stored in that bond to be released to allow work, excuse me, to happen in the cell. That's a bad drawing. I apologize for that. But that's pretty much it. Okay, so cellular respiration produces ATP. ATP is energy. It has chemical energy that we release when we break the bonds in that phosphate tail.